Wouldn't it be nice to have several thought leaders in your industry know and love your brand? Start a podcast. Invite your industry's thought leaders to be guests on your show and start reaping the benefits of having a network full of industry influencers. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to the B2B Growth Show, a podcast dedicated to helping B2B executives achieve explosive growth. Whether you're looking for techniques and strategies or tools and resources, you've come to the right place. I'm Jonathan Green.
And I'm James Carberry.
Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to the B2B Growth Show. We are here today with Wayne Cerullo. He is the Chief Connection Officer at B2P Partners. Wayne, how you doing today?
Excellent. Glad to be here.
I am excited to chat with you today, Wayne. We're going to be talking about prospect personas that make a difference. And there's three specific things we're going to be diving into today. But before we do that, I'd love for our listeners to just have a little bit of context about you and what your company B2P Partners does. So if you could just explain a little bit of context for us, that'd be great.
Great. Thanks. Well, you'll notice that B2B and B2P are very similar, but a little bit different. And there's the purpose to that. That wasn't random. So B2P is a marketing strategy firm for B2B firms who are selling in complex environments. And our mission is to make B2B more powerful by making it more personal. So our experience comes from working with companies like Siemens, Microsoft, Intel, Baxter, Citibank, Visa, etc. But our passion is really using prospect insights to help mid-tier challenger companies compete effectively against those giants.
I love it. And so with that being said, Wayne, it makes a lot of sense why this is a topic that is right in your wheelhouse. And so as we talk about these prospect personas, the first idea that you brought up offline was this idea that prospect intelligence is either a competitive advantage or a vulnerability. Can you elaborate on that for us a bit?
Sure. This really is the question, why are we having this conversation? I mean, who cares?
Yeah.
And our view of personas is that they are the embodiment of what is most valuable to that company. They're its most precious asset. It's the difference between having a product and having a market. Because the most important people to your company aren't in your company. And so being able to connect with the people upon whom your success relies is absolutely critical. And that is either a competitive advantage or a vulnerability. We in marketing today, we have lots of tricks and tips. We've got MarTech everywhere. And so there's a lot of things that we're focused on. But unless we understand who it is that we're trying to influence and how we're trying to do that effectively, all those things are just noise. And it's more complicated today than it's ever been because, and this is true of all the industries in which we work, the average product is purchased by 5.4 individuals. And that only grows as the size and complexity of the product increases and the size of the company is larger. So we have a very challenging job as marketers to bring people not only to notice our product and to favor it, but also to create a consensus around it. And one of the companies that we've worked with really brings that story alive. I mentioned we've worked with really big companies, but this is a tiny company that I guarantee almost no one's heard of, but they were going up in the industry of data backup, which even for IT people is not exciting. Yeah. So that's going to be a problem. And they're going up against, IBM, EMC, and all those, gigantic TLAs. And they're a small company with a limited budget. So this is I wanted to tell you this story as an example of prospect intelligence because it's an example of where you need to compete smarter. You can't just compete bigger. They were unfortunately positioning themselves as the cloud backup experts, which was really smart because they had, in fact, kind of invented cloud backup. They were selling a technical product to a technical audience through technical channels. So I love this story because it's one of those cases where you would say, well, these are the last people in the world who need to do any persona research. I mean, they knew the middle names of all of their customers. So they were unfortunately wrong about their assumptions about why people bought and how to get a meeting. And that really became apparent when they tried to move upstream into the enterprise. So we did research with them, that persona research that we're going to talk about, that provided prospect intelligence around how people bought on the enterprise. And very quickly it became clear that talking about cloud was a no-no and backup was boring. So we needed to find a new way of positioning the company. What we did was identify what we call the key prospect insight, and that's the core truth that connects your prospects with your product. And in this case, what we found was that while backup was dull, the threat of data loss and the time to get back up were critical and strategic. And they could get meetings by talking about recovery rather than backup. Okay. So that was a key prospect insight to understand what was motivating their prospects and actually allowed to turn a vulnerability into a competitive advantage.
And so Wayne, what did you guys do to go about getting that insight? Was it just, having conversations with existing customers, asking the right questions? What did you guys do to go about getting that?
Great question. Thanks. We identified the companies that they wanted to win, not their current customers. While those are lovely people, they really needed to understand in depth how people thought in the enterprises whose doors they were not able to open. So we very carefully handpicked a dozen of those folks. We conducted both in-depth individual interviews as well as focus groups at different stages in the repositioning development process. And the way that we do things is we never do use a questionnaire. We never do a standard interview. What we always view these as are exploratory conversations. So we start with understanding how each of these CIOs and CTOs spend their day. What does the role of this whole topic fill in their overall agenda? And then how do they go about making decisions within it? And then finally, talking about some specific ideas and some specific companies within that context. But we have found that to be an incredible way, and I'm going to tell you another story later about how that opens up people's eyes and minds of the company as well as the prospects.
Okay. So this next piece that we're going to touch on, Wayne, you said that persona use continues to evolve in B2B marketing. Explain that for us.
Well, I specifically say evolve because, as you can tell, we're passionate about this. And we're so passionate actually that we focus on what we call prospect personas. The standard industry term is buyer personas, which is totally great, except that not everyone's a buyer. And in B2B, you'll know that only a minority of the people that you actually interact with and who influence the decisions actually would be considered the decision maker or the buyer. But if you don't get the other influencers and researchers and blockers, you're not going to get through. You're not going to get a decision. And as I said at the start, you need to create a consensus. Simply getting a champion isn't going to get you where you need to go. So having said that, the use of personas evolves, and we know that through industry research that we conduct. We've just completed the third year of this annual industry survey, and a couple points that your listeners might be interested in, and we're happy to share results of the survey if you contact us, is that use of personas with B2B marketers has increased from about half, about 2 years ago or so, to about 2/3 now. So they're pretty common. Mm-hmm. And the good news is that they're having more impact. One of the things we look at is whether the personas created new insights or corrected faulty assumptions. And similarly, the proportion who said that they have contributed in that way went from about half to about 70% saying that personas now help them discover new insights or correct faulty assumptions. Problem is that about a quarter say they're still not respected in their organization. And I would say maybe the key point that we found is the next one, that, and these are just a few of the highlights, that the difference between being able to create new insights and create value and not is whether or not the marketer actually conducted quality external persona research. Okay. So if they did conduct external research on personas directly, the chances of those personas creating new insights was 92%. If they did not do that kind of research, the chance of new insights and learning and respect was 11%. So huge difference there. And as a result, last tidbit that might be interesting to listeners is that personas are being used for more and more applications. Most marketers in the B2B world are now using them for things like targeting, positioning, content marketing. But what we're starting to see is that about half of those marketers are now using them in areas like sales engagement, go-to-market planning, marketing automation. And I particularly love seeing more marketers using personas in sales alignment and marketing, because it allows sales and marketing to come together in more than a zero-sum game, like your point of view and my point of view. When we come together around a clear perception of who prospects are and how they buy, and we're able to reveal to the sales department things that they would not hear because they're in a sales mode, and people will tell us things they won't tell the sales people, then that just creates a whole new level of trust, respect, and interaction that I think is very exciting.
That is super interesting. I've talked with folks in the past about just the impact that external research can have. And so it's talking to you, Wayne, is just affirming. But, you can't listen to this conversation and not buy into the fact that type of, that level of research clearly has an impact. What do you think keeps organizations from taking the step to actually get that research done?
Excellent question. The first thing is what I intimated with the first story, which is we know this already. We don't need to spend the time or effort on that. Second, I would say, is a misperception of what is involved. We operate in a very agile method, which allows us to get a lot of learning in a short period of time and remarkably little money, I might add. So it can be done more efficiently than is often thought. Another is that there's not enough of an understanding about the difference that it can make. And as a result, we've actually just written a book on the difference that personas can make. So knowing some of those case studies really can open people's eyes to the fact that there are lots of people, and I would say, most of the companies that we work with start out thinking that this isn't really something they need to be doing. And then once they do it and they discover what they didn't know, then it just opens up a whole new environment. And perhaps last of all is it brings some energy into the conversation. I mean, rather than our painting over our windows and thinking that that's what the outside world looks like, actually going out and looking at the house we live in from the outside in, simply by itself brings a new perspective, brings some fresh energy, and allows people to work together in a way that they otherwise wouldn't, were there not kind of a new source of insights in the conversation.
Got it. Okay, Wayne, this last point that we're going to touch on before I let you go today, you mentioned that real personas do make a real difference. Can you explain what that means?
Sure. So we've been at this for a while. We've been, seeing people use and misuse personas for, more than a dozen years. And so one of the things I wanted to do just to be able to encourage us all to stay true and to stick with, what we really know to be important in appealing to those companies to those humans who are the most important to our company because they're outside our company, is to put together the stories of companies that have gone through this process and see what difference that makes. So we just wrote a book called Personas with Punch, which is a story of half dozen companies that have really made a difference with personas. It's not about the tactics of how to create personas. It's really about the story of impact that personas can make. And I wanted to end with a story. We started with a story about a small company. This is about a really big company. I'm not going to identify them, but they were in the hospital equipment brand and had been the leading brand at one point, and now definitely were not when we were meeting with them. And they were last in what are called class ratings, which are in the healthcare arena, the way that companies get ranked. And they needed to break out very quickly. So we did research on how people buy IV pump systems and who are the personas that are involved. So in this case, we actually had to go to 5 different functions within the company. And this story is in the book. And understand what are the benefit chains for each of those individuals and those functions as they consider this thing called an IV pump system. From the nurse to the IT director, it's a wide range of perspectives. So we need to understand each of those and how they work together, map their journey, and how to create a consensus to get a buying decision. Well, as a result of that, the company was able to kind of regain their footing and get going. But the reason I told you that story is to tell you this one, which is in the process of doing those interviews, and by not using a questionnaire, by not assuming that we knew all the things that we needed to know, we actively listened and heard a tiny competitor be mentioned multiple times as just a factor in the business. So what we did was recommend to the company that we do some additional research on the people who were the customers of that company to find out what made them such a valued partner. And by going back and doing this win-loss research, we identified that beyond the product, it was the process and the people that were just so critical to the onboarding process. So it went beyond our original set of questions. And as a result, I'm thankful and exultant to say that the company ended up restaffing their implementation teams, reorganizing how they onboarded, and went from giving away the onboarding service to actually charging for it, which is pretty remarkable. Yeah. And the reason I tell you all of that is that at the end of that process, they went from worst to first in class ratings. So the story that I just told, and it's one of the 6 in the book, is about a company that applied the power of personas, not just in the marketing realm, but actually in the entire customer success and sales realm in a way that changed the entire success of the company. So I just want to encourage us all to stick with what we know to be true in the marketing world and to focus on our personas and the people in whose hands our fate lies.
Wayne, this has been incredible. How can folks go about getting access to the survey that you mentioned as well as the book that you just finished up?
Sure. So if they just want to send me an email to get-started@b2ppartners.com, get-started@b2ppartners, I'd be glad to send them whatever it is that they're interested in. They can check us out on the website, of course, B2P Partners. We're on Twitter at, amazingly, B2P Partners. And consistency has its advantages. So, happy to encourage anyone and answer questions. Just want to help see marketing take the leadership role that it ought to. I'll just end with this. One of the beautiful things about what we do is that I think we're really in the business, all of us, and I really appreciate what you do, James, of helping companies rediscover the purpose for which they were created. And actually, if you go to the Latin word company, it actually means to break bread together. And I think that's what we need to be doing more of.
I love it. We're putting a big emphasis on that in our business, trying to create real community, kind of face-to-face community with some dinners that we're planning with guests and listeners in different parts of the country this year. Because I believe the same thing, that when we think about relationships with our customers in that way, I just think everybody wins when we really want to have that level of depth in a relationship with the people that we serve. I think it just ends up being an all-around win. So I appreciate your time today, Wayne. This has been fantastic. So I really appreciate it, man.
Awesome. Thank you. Glad to hear what you're doing, and I support that as well.
There are lots of ways to build a community, and we've chosen to build the B2B growth community through this podcast. But because of the way podcasts work, it's really hard to engage with our listeners. And without engagement, it's tough to build a great community. So here's what we've decided to do. We're organizing small dinners across the country with our listeners and guests. No sales pitches, no agenda, just great conversations with like-minded people. We'll talk business, we'll talk family, we'll talk goals and dreams. We'll build friendships. So if you'd like to be a part of a B2B growth dinner in a city near you, go to b2bgrowthdinners.com. That's b2bgrowthdinners.com. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.